Imagine a calm morning at the airport where travelers hustle through terminals, each carrying their stories, their hopes, and their destinations in hand. Among them is a young mother, Lisa, with her infant daughter cradled in her arms. Her face shines with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. This trip is important. Little does she know, her journey is about to become something no passenger would ever want to experience. The sun beams through Terminal C as the last boarding call echoes for Flight 237 to Los Angeles. Lisa, balancing a diaper bag on her shoulder and her daughter snuggled close, makes her way onto the plane. She exchanges a warm, polite nod with the crew at the entrance, her expression quietly hopeful for a smooth flight. It's been a long week, filled with work obligations and sleepless nights with a teething baby. She looks for her seat while murmuring reassurances to her daughter, trying her best to calm her. The aisle is narrow, and passengers busy themselves with stowing bags and settling in. Lisa finds her row, 22A, a window seat that offers some privacy to nurse her baby during the flight. She sighs in relief, begins to organize herself, and offers a kind smile to the elderly man sat beside her. He nods in response, and for a moment, everything seems normal. Then, she notices her armrest is sticky and covered in what looks like leftover soda. She presses the call button. Enter Angela, the flight attendant assigned to this area of the cabin. Her uniform is pristine, her posture sharp, but her eyes carry a glance of judgment. Angela strides briskly toward the seat. From her first breath, Lisa senses the invisible wall of coldness. Yes? Angela asks tersely, her expression neutral but her tone lacking courtesy. Lisa hesitates, trying to brush off the tone. The armrest here is sticky. I think it might need a quick wipe, she says politely, motioning toward the mess. Angela folds her arms. Did you try cleaning it yourself first? We are very busy up front. Taken aback, Lisa blinks. I don't have anything to clean it with and I'm holding my baby. Could you? Ma'am, Angela interrupts, we provide everyone with napkins during beverage service. You're welcome to use those or I can bring something when I'm free. There are over 100 passengers here. Several heads in the cabin turn subtly at Angela's increasingly loud tone. Lisa looks around, uncomfortable, suddenly conscious of the attention. The elderly man next to her shifts uncomfortably, but stays silent. All right, I'll wait, Lisa says after a moment, deciding to de-escalate. Angela nods curtly and spins on her heel without another word. Lisa bites the inside of her cheek, focusing her attention back on her daughter. The air in the cabin shifts noticeably as the tension lingers. A few passengers exchange glances. Others murmur faintly. Something is off. An hour into the flight, the baby starts crying. It's a piercing, desperate wail, a familiar sound to any parent, yet exhausting nonetheless. Lisa does her best to soothe her daughter, bouncing her lightly and whispering a lullaby, but the cries echo through the confined space of the plane. Patience among the passengers begins to wane. A man sitting 2 rows ahead groans audibly. Someone else sighs exaggeratedly. Angela reappears. Her brows are furrowed as she approaches with an air of annoyance. Ma'am, you need to get that under control, she says, voice low but tense. Her eyes dart toward the baby with thinly veiled disdain. Lisa blinks, stunned. She's an infant, she explains carefully, keeping her voice calm despite the growing heat rising through her chest. I'm doing my best here, she's just uncomfortable. Angela doesn't budge. We have other passengers who need a peaceful flight. Lisa takes a breath, steadying herself. I understand that, but I can't just switch her off. Have you ever traveled with a baby? It's not easy. Angela's lips tighten, and for a split second, an almost imperceptible look of ridicule crosses her face. Maybe you should have thought of that before boarding. The words hang in the air, heavy and pointed. Gasps ripple through the nearby passengers. Lisa's cheeks flush. Her grip on her daughter tightens. Anger wells in her chest, but more than that, humiliation. The elderly man beside her clears his throat as though to intervene, but falls short of speaking up. The cabin grows eerily silent, save for the baby's whimpers. For a moment, nothing moves but the subtle sway of the airplane. What's going on here? A deep, authoritative voice suddenly interrupts. Heads turn as a man emerges from row 17, his gaze sharp and commanding. His tailored suit and calm demeanor radiate authority. Angela freezes, her professional facade cracking ever so slightly. Asa glances up toward the man, her heart racing. She doesn't know who he is, but something about his presence fills the space with anticipation. The cabin is hushed as all eyes fall on him. passengers now fully invested in the unfolding drama. Angela straightens. "Just helping with a passenger issue, sir," she says smoothly, though her tone trembles slightly. The man steps closer. His piercing gaze locks onto Angela. "I saw everything," he says simply, his voice low yet firm. "And I think we need to talk." The tension in the cabin is palpable as the commanding man from row 17 locks eyes with Angela, his demeanor a mix of concern and quiet authority. Passengers sit up straighter, their focus glued to the unfolding scene. Lisa cradles her daughter close, her cheeks flushed from the encounter, but something about this stranger's presence is oddly reassuring. Angela clears her throat, her professional demeanor now faltering under the scrutiny. "Sir," she begins, "this passenger has been causing a disturbance. I was simply addressing it." Yet, her voice wavers at the edges. "Causing a disturbance?" the man repeats, arching an eyebrow. His tone is curious but firm, his words ringing clear even over the hum of the plane's engines. "You mean the mother tending to her crying infant? Or the judgmental tone I heard you use moments ago?" His choice of words is deliberate, each syllable landing like a stone in a pool. Nearby passengers exchange glances, some nodding ever so subtly in agreement. Angela shifts uncomfortably, her hands folding behind her back. "It's my responsibility to ensure everyone's comfort," she replies curtly. Some passengers expressed frustration about the noise. "And your solution was what? To berate her? Let me ask you this. If the child were upset because of hunger or cold, would you consider it her fault as well? Or is there something about her?" His eyes flicker knowingly, almost imperceptibly, that made you less inclined to treat her kindly? Angela's face hardens, her lips tightening into a thin line. "I'm not sure what you're insinuating, sir, but I can assure you, we hold all passengers to the same standards." The man smiles faintly, but it doesn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm quite sure you do. But same standards don't always mean fair treatment, do they? Perhaps we can revisit this conversation with the captain." The cabin grows more silent, if such a thing is possible, as his words land like a sledgehammer. Angela stiffens visibly, her expression faltering for a brief moment. She looks around as though searching for an escape route, but finding none, she nods curtly. "If you feel that's necessary," she says finally, her tone clipped before turning on her heel and walking briskly toward the front of the plane. Lisa exhales deeply, the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding escaping in a soft rush. She looks up at the man, her gratitude evident in her tear-brimmed eyes. "Thank you," she murmurs, her voice barely above a whisper. He nods in return, his expression softening. "No need to thank me," he says quietly. "Just focus on your daughter. She's more important than any of this." His eyes settle on the baby, who is now sniffling softly but noticeably calmer in her mother's arms. Satisfied that no further immediate action is needed, the man returns to his seat, though the weight of his intervention continues to resonate throughout the cabin. Conversations rise and fall in low tones, passengers speculating about the identity of the assertive stranger. Lisa, still processing the past few minutes, focuses intently on rocking her daughter to sleep, her hands trembling slightly. The flight continues, uneventful for the next 30 minutes, until Angela reappears, her face a carefully controlled mask of professionalism, but the edges of irritation still visible. She approaches Lisa's row, carrying a tray with a small bottle of water and a single paper napkin. Without a word, she sets it down on Lisa's tray table. Lisa furrows her brow. "What is this?" Angela's voice is measured, but barely so. "A beverage. On the house." Her words are sharp at their edges, more duty than kindness. Lisa stares at the bottle, the gesture feeling less like an apology and more like an obligation grudgingly fulfilled. Before she can respond, Angela turns briskly and leaves, as though checking a chore off her list. Meanwhile, other passengers are becoming less passive. An older woman seated 2 rows ahead of Lisa turns to her seatmate. "I saw it all," she whispers loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "That attendant didn't even try to hide how she treated her. Who treats a mother like that?" The murmurs ripple outwards. A younger man nearby pulls out his phone, clearly recording his thoughts in a whispered vlog update. "Guys, you're not gonna believe what's happening on this flight," he begins, his eyes wide for the camera. "This flight attendant totally singled out this mom. It's unreal. I gotta upload this." The domino effect is unmistakable. Passengers on both sides of the aisle begin offering quiet support in their own ways. The elderly man next to Lisa finally speaks up, his voice rough but kind. "Young lady," he says, leaning slightly toward her, You've handled this with more dignity than most people would. Don't let her get to you." Lisa offers him a small, grateful smile, her fingers brushing back her daughter's fine hair. "Thank you," she whispers back, the words holding a weight of appreciation she can't quite express. The plane begins to shake slightly. Turbulence. The overhead lights flicker momentarily, and a voice comes over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a patch of mild turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The routine announcement carries an undercurrent of calm, yet the timing is uncanny. Passengers grip their armrests, their conversations lowering to sparse mutterings. But turbulence doesn't concern Lisa. She's more preoccupied with the brewing tension that turbulence of another kind has already brought. The minutes pass, the shaking subsides. But then, Lisa notices something strange. The elderly man beside her appears fidgety, his movements stiff. He reaches up with trembling hands to press the call button. It lights up. Angela appears, her expression no less icy. "Yes?" That's when he collapses forward into his tray table, the button's glow still illuminated. Gasps ripple through the cabin as Angela freezes uncertainly. And Lisa, panic coursing through her veins, shouts, "He needs help!" Lisa clutches her daughter tightly, her heart pounding as the elderly man next to her slumps further into his tray table. Around them, murmurs of alarm ripple through the cabin, passengers craning their necks to see what's happening. Angela, standing frozen in the aisle, snaps out of her momentary stupor and grabs the intercom microphone. "Is there a doctor or medical professional on board? Please come forward immediately." Her voice is measured, but the urgency is clear. Several seats behind, a middle-aged woman wearing scrubs and sneakers stands quickly. "I'm a nurse," she declares, stepping into the aisle and weaving her way toward row 22. Passengers lean aside to make room, their faces tense with worry. Lisa shifts her daughter to her other arm, trying to stay out of the way as the nurse kneels beside the elderly man. His shallow breathing and pale complexion send a wave of unease through the cabin. The nurse's voice is calm but firm. "I need space to work. Can we lay him flat?" she asks. Angela hesitates, glancing toward the flight attendant's station further up the plane. "I'll bring an emergency kit," she stammers before hurrying off. Passengers around the row spring into motion as if directed by an invisible force. Two men in nearby seats stand and help maneuver the man onto the floor in the narrow aisle while the nurse instructs them on positioning him safely. Lisa watches helplessly from her seat, her daughter now whimpering softly. It feels surreal, the quiet hum of the engines now underscored by the fraught energy surrounding them. Within moments, Angela returns with a compact medical kit and an oxygen mask, her earlier coldness replaced by a nervous efficiency. She kneels reluctantly beside the nurse, keeping her movements sharp and businesslike. "Can you hold this steady?" the nurse asks, gesturing to the oxygen mask. Angela nods, holding the device over the man's face while the nurse checks his pulse. Tension among the passengers grows as whispers fill the air. "Is he going to be okay?" someone asks from a few rows back. "Shouldn't we be landing?" another voice pipes up. Meanwhile, the nurse stays calm, asking for the man's carry-on bag in hopes of finding any medical information or medications. Moments later, a passenger produces it from the overhead bin. Lisa finds herself unable to look away, her chest tight with fear, not just for the elderly man, but for what will happen next. She turns her gaze to her daughter, gently rocking her smaller body against her own. Then, the deep voice from earlier cuts through the tense atmosphere once again. The suited man from row 17 strides forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Excuse me," he says to Angela and the nurse, "are either of you familiar with defibrillator use? I can assist if needed." Angela starts to speak, but the nurse nods quickly. "I may need you," she replies, focusing on the man. "Let's see if he's stabilizing first." The man crouches beside them, studying the elderly passenger intently. "Captain should know if we need an emergency landing," he adds, glancing up at Angela before locking eyes with her even more sternly than before. "Have you alerted him?" Angela's face betrays a flicker of discomfort, but her reply is clipped. "Not yet. Do it now!" He cuts her off with quiet authority. His command leaves no room for hesitation, and Angela, visibly flustered, moves away toward the cockpit without further protest. Whispering speculation spreads once more among the passengers about who this man could possibly be, his composure steadfast even as the situation heightens. The next moments are a blur of activity. The The nurse administers oxygen and keeps a sharp eye on the man's pulse, guiding the suited stranger in checking for additional signs of distress. Meanwhile, Angela reaches the cockpit and speaks hurriedly with the pilots. Lisa notices her stiff posture, the way her gestures seem mechanical. The intercom crackles to life moments later. The captain's voice cuts through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency on board, we will be preparing for an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Please remain calm and seated and follow instructions from the cabin crew." Passengers react with surprise and concern, their whispered conversations mixing with the low hum of the engines. Some glance toward the elderly man on the floor, others exchange nervous looks. Lisa feels her pulse quicken, a growing unease washing over her. The situation, already fraught, has now reached a critical juncture. As Angela returns to her post, her expression remains distant, her earlier veneer of professionalism not quite covering her apparent unwillingness to deal with the escalating crisis. But before she can speak further, the suited man's voice interrupts again. "Miss," he says, his piercing gaze falling on her, "you may want to consider showing some genuine concern, not just for your job, but for these people who are depending on you." The subtle rebuke carries effortlessly through the cabin, his words echoing in the silence as Angela's cheeks flush slightly. She opens her mouth to respond, but no words come out. Lisa exchanges a glance with the nurse, who nods briefly before resuming her work. The suited man stands, adjusting his tie as he watches the situation unfold. The cabin is tense but coordinated, with passengers staying seated and silent, somehow unified by the shared experience. Just as things appear to stabilize, the plane jolts violently. A rush of gasps spreads through the rows, overhead compartments rattling ominously. Lisa instinctively grips the armrest with one hand, holding tight to her daughter with the other. The plane dips slightly before leveling out again, the turbulence dissipating almost immediately, but the rattling has left nerves frayed. The elderly man stirs faintly on the ground, his eyelids flickering open. The nurse snaps her fingers near his face, leaning forward to check his responsiveness. Relief floods Lisa's chest as she hears the nurse mutter, "He's coming around." Yet before the relief can fully sink in, another announcement blares through the intercom. This time, it's neither the captain nor Angela. The robotic-sounding words are chilling. "Brace for emergency landing. Crew, prepare the cabin." Passengers brace themselves as tension fills the cabin, the emergency announcement ringing in their ears. Lisa tightens her hold on her daughter, the infant now wailing again in response to the disarray. Around her, passengers hurriedly adjust their seatbelts, some clutching armrests as the plane begins to descend. The once lively murmurs have subsided into anxious silence, the realization of an emergency landing settling heavily in their minds. The suited man from row 17 swiftly takes charge once more. His firm voice cuts through the intercom's repetitive instructions. "Everyone, remain calm. Stay seated, heads down when instructed, and follow protocol. We will get through this safely." His calm assertiveness seems to stabilize the jittery energy in the cabin. Passengers seem more collected, some even nodding in silent agreement with his words. Angela, visibly shaken but trying to mask her uneasiness, moves down the aisle with shaky determination, ensuring passengers are following safety preparations. Yet her demeanor, stripped of its former icy confidence, betrays her inner turmoil. She avoids contact with the suited man, her gaze flickering toward him only briefly before interacting nervously with the passengers. As the plane levels out slightly, Lisa glances at the elderly man, now lying on the floor. The nurse continues to monitor him closely, her hands steady even as tension crackles in the air. The man groans softly, his eyelids fluttering open for just a moment. A flicker of relief washes over Lisa, though the gravity of the situation weighs heavily on her. Then it happens. A shudder runs through the plane, stronger than any turbulence before. Overhead compartments pop open, bags tumbling into the aisles. Gasps erupt, and a child somewhere in the back starts screaming. The aircraft dips sharply, eliciting more shrieks from the passengers. Lisa clutches her daughter tightly, her body pressing instinctively into the seat. Adrenaline surges through her veins. Her fear is palpable. "Stay seated!" The captain's voice booms over the intercom. "We are entering a rapid descent for landing." His tone is controlled but carries a weight of urgency that sends chills through the cabin. Amid the chaos, Angela trips over a fallen bag, falling slightly into a passenger's lap. She quickly regains her footing, her composure slipping further as she mutters a hurried apology, avoiding their gaze. The suited man pays her no heed. His attention is laser-focused on the situation unfolding. He moves toward the elderly man and the nurse, careful yet deliberate in his steps. "Do you need me to hold him steady during the descent?" he asks the nurse, his voice low but carrying effortlessly over the surrounding chaos. The nurse nods tightly. "Yes, keep his head stable. I'll keep checking his blood pressure." Without hesitation, the man kneels beside her, his polished appearance now a stark juxtaposition to the frenetic energy around him. Passengers nearby glance at him with both curiosity and gratitude, his mere presence seeming to instill a surprising sense of order. Lisa watches him closely, her mind whirring. Who is this man? A corporate executive? A doctor? Someone trained for emergencies? His composure under pressure is uncanny, almost unsettling in its calmness but undeniably reassuring in the pressing moment. The airplane continues to shudder as the engines roar louder. Instructions blare repeatedly over the intercom. Heads down, brace position. Passengers obey, their fear palpable but disciplined by necessity. Lisa follows suit, leaning forward as much as possible, her arms protectively encircling her child. Her daughter cries against her chest, the sound breaking Lisa's heart, but there's no time to dwell. Every action now feels crucial for survival. Just ahead, the suited man and the nurse remain at the elderly man's side. Despite the descent, their focus on keeping him stable remains unwavering. Angela, meanwhile, stands frozen near the flight attendant's station, gripping the counter as though it's the only thing keeping her upright. Her earlier demeanor of detached professionalism is now entirely gone, replaced by visible panic. Suddenly, a loud metallic creak reverberates through the cabin, followed by another jolt of turbulence. More bags fall from overhead compartments, and the lights flicker ominously. A woman several rows up screams, her voice cutting through the muted instructions on the intercom. The plane dips again before stabilizing, earning a wave of uneasy murmurs as passengers glance around nervously. His mind races as she presses a kiss to her daughter's forehead, whispering soothing words. There's no way to mask her fear, but she has to anchor herself for her baby. And then she notices it. Angela is slowly approaching her aisle, her expression fraught with uncertainty. "Ma'am," Angela says, her voice uneven, "is there anything you need? For the baby?" Lisa blinks in surprise, momentarily forgetting the disarray around her. The question seems out of place, almost surreal, considering Angela's prior behavior. For a split second, Lisa sees something different in the flight attendant's expression. Regret? Shame? It's hard to tell, and there's no time to dwell on it. Lisa simply shakes her head. "We're okay," she says softly, her focus still on her child. Angela nods, biting her lip. She lingers for a moment before hurrying back down the aisle, her actions now less mechanical, more human. It's as if the gravity of the emergency has stripped away her defenses, leaving behind someone genuinely trying, however awkwardly, to make amends. The suited man, still at the elderly passenger's side, glances up briefly as Angela passes. His gaze follows her for a moment, unreadable but intense. Then he returns his attention to the situation at hand. The intercom crackles again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing in approximately 5 minutes. Cabin crew, final preparations." The captain's voice is steady, almost soothing in its authority. As the announcement ends, Lisa feels a wave of anticipation sweep through the cabin. The plane is no longer just a vehicle, it's a lifeboat, carrying all its occupants toward both imminent danger and the promise of solid ground. Her grip on her daughter tightens as she takes a deep breath. And then, almost imperceptibly, something shifts in the cabin. A sound, a faint hiss, barely audible over the engines. It's coming from somewhere nearby, and though Lisa can't place it, the look on the suited man's face suggests he hears it too. His eyes narrow as he scans the space around him, his posture tensing. "What is that?" someone murmurs from a few rows back, their voice tinged with alarm. The suited man doesn't answer. Instead, he rises slowly to his feet, his expression darkening as he prepares to investigate the noise. The faint hiss in the cabin grows steadily louder, like a forewarning cutting through the already tense atmosphere. Lisa strains her ears, her heart pounding as she tries to locate the source of the unsettling noise. Around her, passengers exchange uneasy glances, their bodies stiffened and braced for impact. The suited man, now fully alert, steps cautiously down the aisle, his sharp gaze scanning every corner for clues. The sound seems to come from near the elderly man's carry-on, still lying rumpled near his seat after the turbulence dislodged it. "Excuse me," the suited man says, his voice low but commanding. The nurse observes him warily, still focused on her patient's fragile state. Lisa notices the way his presence demands attention, the flicker of tension in his movements barely betraying an underlying calm. He crouches, reaching for the bag, and gently unzips it. Inside, surrounded by the mundane items of a traveler's life medication bottles, a folded newspaper, and a toiletry kit, is the unmistakable gleam of steel. A small but clearly active oxygen cylinder, its valve slightly twisted, hisses out gas at a steady pace. Lisa's stomach drops as realization dawns. The elderly man must have brought the portable tank for medical reasons, but it's now potentially dangerous, especially in the tight pressure of the cabin. For a second, no one breathes. The suited man's brow furrows, his quick assessment of the situation apparent in the flicker of his eyes. "We need to secure this now," he states firmly. "If this cylinder leaks any further, it could cause an issue with the cabin pressure, particularly during the landing." Angela, standing frozen several rows back, watches in barely concealed alarm. Passengers nearby begin whispering urgently to one another, their concern rapidly escalating. Someone in the back of the plane shouts, "What's going on?" eliciting murmured reassurances from others further up the aisle. The suited man straightens, holding the oxygen cylinder delicately by its base. "Angela," he says, his tone unmistakably pointed, "where is your oversight? This should have been detected during boarding and properly stored. Were there no checks done?" Angela flinches, her gaze dropping for a moment before her professionalism shields her face. She steps forward, albeit hesitantly, her voice trembling. "It must have been overlooked with the rush of boarding. I didn't notice." "Clearly," the suited man interrupts coolly. "Well, it's noticed now, and we're fortunate it hasn't caused a more serious issue." He gestures toward the attendant station toward the front. "Do you have a containment case or a way to stabilize this for the remainder of the flight?" Angela nods quickly. "Yes, let me get it." She practically stumbles over her feet as she rushes toward the station, her earlier mask of composure entirely stripped away. The murmurs among passengers intensify, the growing communal anxiety rippling outward like a wave. Lisa watches in restless silence, her arms tightening protectively around her still-crying daughter. Her thoughts are a whirlwind. How was such a thing missed? What would have happened if it hadn't been discovered in time? She catches the suited man's eye as he moves the cylinder carefully further down the aisle, the look they briefly share filled with unspoken understanding. Despite the dire circumstances, there's an unshakable steadiness in his expression that anchors her fleeting panic. Angela returns moments later, carrying what looks like a reinforced storage case designed precisely for situations like this. Her hands visibly tremble as she opens the case, and the suited man steps in without hesitation to assist. Together, they secure the leaking oxygen cylinder inside the protective container, Angela sputtering assurances about running safety checks after landing. Before anyone can relax, the captain's voice cuts through the intercom again, a little faster this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now moments from touchdown. Cabin crew, take your final safety positions. Stay braced until we have come to a complete stop." The procedural announcement reignites the tension, passengers immediately assuming their brace positions as instructed. The plane dips sharply again, heightening the collective anxiety. Even the reinforced overhead compartments rattle aggressively, some still struggling to keep their faulty latches closed. Lisa forces herself forward, cradling her daughter protectively under her chin, whispering soothing, desperate affirmations to keep herself grounded. Meanwhile, Angela, trying to steady her breath, secures herself at the flight attendant's seat near the front. Tears glisten faintly in her eyes, though she fights to remain outwardly composed. What little control she felt she had through this flight is now completely gone, overtaken by the sheer weight of the chaos descending around her. Lisa holds on to the last audible words from the captain's intercom. "Brace, brace, brace," as the city lights below rapidly come into view through the faint cracks between window shades. The cabin shudders one final time, the screech of tires hitting the runway dragging out into a piercing din as the plane skids down the tarmac. The inertia of the sudden deceleration presses everyone against their seats, screams punctuating the noise as oxygen masks sway chaotically from above. And then stillness. A tense, deafening silence blankets the cabin as the plane lurches to an abrupt, final stop. No one speaks, the collective exhale slow and tentative. Lisa remains frozen, her daughter now wailing in confused fear, but she's alive. Somehow, against all odds, they've made it. The intercom clicks again. It's the captain, his voice thick with relief. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've safely landed. Please remain in your seats as we assess the next steps. Emergency personnel will be arriving shortly." Around her, passengers emerge cautiously from brace positions, their expressions ranging from stunned disbelief to quiet gratitude. Lisa swallows hard, tears biting at her eyes as she lifts her baby and kisses her forehead, holding her tightly. Across the aisle, the suited man locks eyes with her once more, his body unbending as he catches his breath. Angela stands too, unsteady but upright. Her strained gaze scans the cabin, landing on Lisa, and for a brief moment, she appears ready to say something. But before she can speak, the screech of a rolling airway ladder against the plane interrupts her intentions. Emergency lights outside flicker into the cabin through the windows, signaling help has arrived. Lisa doesn't know what waits beyond the exit door, but a creeping sense of finality and unfinished reckonings still hangs heavy in the air. Passengers sit in tense silence, the plane still resting on the runway after its harrowing emergency landing. The faint sound of sirens outside grows louder, signaling the approach of emergency response teams. Inside the cabin, no one dares to speak above a whisper, the collective relief of being alive still warring with the lingering adrenaline from the terrifying descent. Lisa remains frozen in her seat, her daughter nestled against her chest. Though the baby has quieted, her small body trembles slightly in Lisa's arms. The young mother tilts her head forward, pressing her lips to her daughter's soft hair, her eyes shutting tightly. The shock of the experience hasn't yet left her system, and she clings to the simple, grounding sensation of her child's warmth. Now, other passengers cautiously begin to stir, gathering fallen bags and straightening themselves. The murmurs grow as emergency lights outside illuminate the plane's dim interior, casting sharp, eerie shadows on the walls. The elderly man who had collapsed earlier is still lying in the aisle, his breathing more stable now but his face pale and tired. The nurse continues to monitor him closely, her professionalism unfaltering despite the extraordinary circumstances. The suited man from row 17 stands with deliberate calm, towering over the scene with an air of quiet authority. His eyes scan the cabin, his sharp gaze pausing momentarily on Angela, who lingers near the flight attendant's station. Her usually poised demeanor is decidedly absent. She's pale, her shoulders drooping, and her hands barely steady as she adjusts a loose strand of hair. Angela's gaze flickers nervously to the suited man, but she quickly averts her eyes when their stares meet. He doesn't say anything to her, there's no need. The weight of unspoken judgment settles between them like a physical presence. Yet, rather than relish her growing discomfort, his focus shifts back to what must be done next. "Emergency personnel will be boarding soon," he announces decisively, his firm tone carrying through the cabin as heads turn to him for leadership. "Let's prepare to clear the aisle and assist where needed. The sooner they can access our injured passenger, the better." Passengers murmur in agreement and begin clearing space. Lisa watches as two men rise from their seats near the front and start moving bags that have tumbled from the overhead bins. One of them glances at the suited man for reassurance, and the subtle nod he receives spurs him to continue. Angela, still standing near the front, seems reluctant to move, as if rooted in place by her own uncertainty. "Miss," the suited man says, addressing her directly for the first time since the landing. His voice is calm but carries a weight that makes it impossible to ignore. "It might be time to step up and assist your passengers." Lisa notices the way Angela flinches at his words, how her lips part as if to respond but no sound comes out. For a moment, the tension feels unbearable, but then Angela seems to gather herself. With a slight nod, she moves toward the middle of the cabin, assisting passengers in retrieving seat cushions and lost items. Though her movements are still somewhat mechanical, there is a faint shift in her demeanor, a hesitant attempt to rise to the occasion, however belatedly. As Angela passes Lisa's row, their eyes meet briefly. An unspoken apology seems to linger there, but neither woman speaks. Lisa's grip on her daughter tightens as she turns her attention back to soothing the infant, choosing this moment to focus on her instead of confronting Angela's expression of guilt. The emergency exit doors are finally opened, and the cool night air rushes into the cabin, carrying with it the acrid scent of burnt rubber. Bright flashlights and fluorescent vests become visible just outside, the emergency response team moving into position. Paramedics climb the stairs and board the plane, carrying medical kits and stretchers. Their professionalism is an instant comfort, a reassuring force amidst the chaos. One paramedic immediately tends to the elderly man, The nurse, still kneeling beside him, updates them on his condition. Another team member speaks briefly with the suited man, who has clearly positioned himself as the de facto leader in this tense situation. Meanwhile, Angela hangs back near the flight attendant's station again, her eyes darting between the scene and the passengers. Lisa watches it all unfold with muted detachment until one of the paramedics approaches her row. "Ma'am, do you need any assistance for you or your child?" he asks gently. His tone is kind, but professional. Lisa shakes her head slowly, her voice barely audible over the residual commotion. "We're okay," she whispers, though the tears brimming in her eyes suggest otherwise. The paramedic nods, offering her a reassuring pat on the arm before moving along to assist others. The elderly man is eventually lifted onto a stretcher and carefully maneuvered down the narrow aisle. As he is carried out, faint applause breaks out among the passengers, a show of gratitude for the responders' swift work. Lisa feels her chest tighten at the sound, a swell of mixed relief and exhaustion settling over her. As the stretcher disappears through the exit and the paramedics begin shepherding passengers off row by row, Lisa carefully gathers her belongings. She cradles her no-sleeping daughter, who clings to her with tiny fingers gripping her shirt. The journey down the stairs to the tarmac feels impossibly long, the cold wind biting at her face as she steps into the open air. Around her, passengers huddle together in small, quiet groups, their faces etched with the night's ordeal. Before climbing into the shuttle bus that awaits them, Lisa glances back at the plane where the suited man stands at the base of the stairs, speaking with one of the emergency responders. His solemn but composed demeanor is still intact, and for a fleeting moment he catches her eye. There's no exchange of words, just a single shared nod of acknowledgement before Lisa turns and boards the bus, holding her daughter close. The sense of safety is a fragile thing, but as the first responders' lights fade into the distance, another thought lurks just beneath Lisa's hazy relief. This journey may be over, but the search for accountability is only beginning. The shuttle bus pulls away from the plane, its cold metal frame holding the exhaustion and unease of Flight 237's passengers. Faces lit by the faint glow of emergency lights outside stare blankly at their reflections in the bus windows, as though searching for a moment's reprieve from the chaos they've endured. The burst of adrenaline that carried everyone through the landing has faded, leaving behind trembling hands clutching bags and the low hum of muffled conversations. Lisa sits toward the back, her baby asleep in her lap, the tiny body rising and falling with each of her shallow, uneven breaths. Lisa's own exhaustion feels bone deep, but her grip on her daughter is firm, protective. Passengers exchange fragments of their disbelief in murmurs, still processing the gravity of the evening. "Can't believe we even landed in one piece," says a man near the front, his hands gesturing animatedly despite the weary slump of his shoulders. Others nod faintly in agreement, though no one dares to raise their voice too much, as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile calm. Lisa doesn't join the conversation. She's too absorbed in the soft, rhythmic breathing of her daughter, her only tether to sanity at this moment. She feels the way her hands tremble against the child's small back and wills herself to steady them. The suited man joins the shuttle last, stepping inside just before the doors hiss shut. Despite his creased shirt and tousled hair, his presence retains its magnetism. He takes a seat near the elderly Mano on a stretcher attended by paramedics and exchanges a brief word with the medical team, ensuring their patient remains stable. This is the kind of control Lisa admires and envies in this moment. Her gaze lingers on him for a moment longer than intended. Then comes Angela, barely slipping through the doors before the bus lurches forward. She holds onto a handrail for balance as the motion sends her stumbling slightly, her usual veneer of control cracking visibly under the strain of the night's events. When her eyes sweep across the bus and momentarily meet Lisa's, Angela falters, her mouth opening as though she plans to speak. But whatever words she had prepared don't make it past her lips, and she moves toward the middle of the shuttle without comment. Lisa's shoulders finally release some of their tension. Maybe this quiet, strained distance suits them both for now. The bus slows, coming to a halt outside an airport terminal illuminated with harsh fluorescent lighting. Emergency personnel are already stationed at the entrance, and lines are beginning to form as responders herd passengers into designated holding areas for debriefing. Bags are passed through checks, passengers are verbally confirmed, and medical cases, like the elderly man's, are given immediate priority. The suited man steps off briskly, quickly conferring with yet another responder, and Lisa begins to wonder who he is. He seems well-versed in crisis management, personable yet firm, professional yet mysterious. A federal agent? A crisis manager for aviation? His clipped exchanges and natural command fuel the quiet speculation among passengers. Lisa is ushered out of the shuttle and toward the terminal's side entrance, balancing her daughter and her small carry-on. When her foot touches the solid cement pavement, she feels a surprising chill crawling up her spine. She exhales visibly into the cold evening and lifts her daughter closer to her chest, bracing against the bitterness in more ways than one. Inside the terminal, the elderly man is wheeled toward a medical assessment area while the rest of the passengers are guided to a small section marked off with barricades. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. The space feels strange, like an impromptu purgatory. Red plastic chairs are scattered haphazardly across linoleum floors, questionably functional coffee machines in the corner offering tepid relief. Lisa feels the weight of exhaustion tugging at her limbs, the adrenaline fading after too many hours of turbulence, both literal and emotional. Angela reappears, stepping carefully into view, as if each of her movements could fracture the already tense space. She shuffles a few papers clipped to a plastic board, avoiding eyes where she can, murmuring politely to airline staff coordinating next steps. Passengers are directed to line up again for identification checks and incident reports, the mundane bureaucracy an incongruous contrast to the night's events. In her fatigued haze, Lisa almost misses Angela stealing glances toward her from across the room. She doesn't approach, but something lingers in her expression, a faint mixture of hesitation, shame, and inescapable guilt. "Excuse me," comes the suited man's voice, puncturing the thick air of the room. He's speaking now to one of the other passengers, shaking their hand firmly, offering calm reassurances. Lisa isn't close enough to hear the conversation clearly, but from his gestures, it's obvious he is debriefing in some capacity. Her curiosity simmers slightly as she wonders what resolve he might bring to the incident that etched itself into her memory. Angela's cold refusal to help, her subsequent mismanagement of the flight, and whatever other judgments she had initially passed. As Lisa waits her turn for debriefing, her baby stirring faintly into half-sleep, the suited man's voice carries over again, this time closer. He stepped toward the airline staff, now addressing Angela directly. "What I witnessed on board cannot be swept aside," he says firmly, each word deliberate. There's no yelling, no dramatics, just a measured tone that carries more weight than volume. Angela stands stiff, her eyes darting away. Passengers nearby shift subtly, ears pricking. Their own anger and dismay reflected quietly in narrowed eyes or pursed lips. Lisa watches as Angela eventually nods, murmuring something Lisa cannot make out. The suited man doesn't push further, but his gaze locks with Angela's for a brief pause before he steps back, giving her room, but not necessarily a reprieve. The undercurrent is clear. Accountability is expected. A temporary silence falls within the terminal, charged and unresolved, setting every nerve on edge. And then, a distinct noise cuts across the atmosphere yet again. Not the hiss of oxygen or the roar of an engine or even the flat static of an intercom, but the echoing clatter of heavy footsteps reverberating from the adjoining hallway. New figures emerge, men and women in plain suits, their sharp postures and clipped voices signaling one unmistakable fact. Investigators have arrived. The investigators step into the terminal, their commanding presence causing a hush to fall over the gathered passengers. Their suits are sharp, their demeanors sharp yet professional, emanating an air of complete control. Each has a notebook or tablet in hand, prepared to document every detail meticulously. The passengers, previously absorbed in their tension-fueled murmurs, grow visibly more tense. Lisa, still cradling her now completely asleep baby, watches the suited individuals approach the barricaded holding area where she and the others had been directed. Her mind, already fatigued, makes a rapid attempt to organize her thoughts in case she is questioned. "Ladies and gentlemen," begins one of the investigators, a woman with piercing eyes and a calm, steady voice. She stands just beyond the cordoned area, addressing the passengers as a group. "I am Special Agent Vieira with the Federal Aviation Administration. My team and I will be conducting interviews regarding the events that transpired aboard Flight 237. For the sake of accuracy and efficiency, please follow all instructions carefully and be patient as we work through this process. Your cooperation is appreciated." Beside her, another investigator steps forward, speaking to the airline staff gathering a few feet away. Lisa follows his gaze and notices Angela among them, her posture tight with unease. Though standing toward the rear of the group, Angela's usual crisp confidence has melted entirely under the strain. A clipboard trembling slightly in her hands betrays how rattled she truly is. Lisa almost feels a pang of sympathy, but it's quickly replaced by a deep-seated exhaustion and something more, a simmering anger. Passengers are soon called one at a time for individual debriefings. Names are checked against the flight manifest, and each person is briefly directed to a small room sectioned off by temporary partitions at the far end of the terminal. As the crowd dwindles around her, Lisa realizes it will be her turn soon. Her palms grow clammy, and her stomach churns with a mix of apprehension and residual adrenaline. How could she possibly encapsulate in words everything that unfolded hours ago? The tense exchanges, the blatant judgment, Angela's clear bias, it all churns through her mind, raw and unresolved. Minutes later, her name is finally called. A younger-looking agent with kind but intent eyes escorts her to a partitioned area. It's sparsely furnished with only a folding table and 2 chairs. She sits carefully, balancing her precious daughter on her lap. "Miss Lisa Harding?" the agent asks, confirming her identity before proceeding. Lisa nods, her grip on her daughter protective and firm. "Yes," she replies, her voice quieter than she expects. Clearing her throat, she follows with, "That's me." The agent offers her a small, reassuring smile before pulling out a notepad. "All right, Miss Harding, let's take this step by step. Could you walk me through what you experienced during your flight tonight? Start wherever feels most relevant." Lisa exhales slowly, her thoughts briefly scattering before she catches hold of one and begins. Slowly at first, then with gathering clarity, she recounts Angela's dismissive treatment when Lisa first boarded the plane, the sticky armrest incident that began it all. Her tone, it was cold, distant, and almost immediately dismissive, Lisa describes. "At first, I thought maybe she was just having a bad day, but things escalated. Later, my daughter started crying as babies do, and Angela approached me again." Lisa pauses, her throat tightening as she relives the humiliation. "She told me I needed to get that under control. As if my baby isn't a human being with needs," Lisa continues, bitterness seeping into her tone. "And when I tried to explain, she responded, almost mocking me, as though I was at fault. I felt like everyone was watching, like I had been singled out based on nothing more than." Lisa stumbles here, carefully picking her next words. "Based on her preconceptions." The agent's pen scratches across the paper rapidly, though his demeanor remains neutral. He doesn't interrupt or prod, merely listens intently, nodding occasionally to encourage her to continue. As Lisa pushes on, recounting the escalating tensions aboard the flight, from the suited man's intervention to the elderly passenger's medical emergency, she feels lighter. The pent-up frustration she carried through the hours is finally finding release. When she finishes, the agent offers a moment of silence before speaking. "Thank you, Miss Harding. I know recounting all of this can be draining, especially after everything you've endured tonight." He closes his notepad but doesn't leave yet. "I'll ask just one more thing for now," he adds knowingly. "Can you describe, in your own words, the general atmosphere Angela created within the cabin? Did it impact other passengers in your view?" Lisa considers the question carefully, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It did," she answers honestly. I could see the discomfort in others. There was whispering, murmuring in the background. I think people noticed the way she was treating me, even if not everyone said or did anything about it." The agent nods, his pen moving again. "Understood. Thank you." As Lisa exits the partition space, she sees Angela still lingering near the airline staff. Her expression is unreadable but undoubtedly tense as she waits for what will likely be her own debriefing. Lisa wonders fleetingly if Angela's version will align with hers, and if her guilt will weigh heavily enough to bring any sense of accountability. Lisa has little time to dwell on the thought. She is ushered back toward the holding area where other passengers sit, some visibly weary, others quietly seething. Outside the room, voices rise briefly before settling, likely investigators conferring about next steps. It's then that Lisa feels the faintest pang of hope. Maybe, just maybe, justice is closer than it seems. Before she can think further, the suited man steps past her, his stride purposeful as he moves toward the investigators. It feels almost inevitable that he'd have a say in what's to come. Lisa's curiosity flickers once more, but exhaustion quickly pulls her thoughts back to her daughter, still sleeping soundly in her arms. For now, that's all that matters. Yet, in the back of Lisa's mind and in the watchful eyes of every other passenger, the night's events remain unfinished, an anticipation lingering as thick as the tension that preceded them. The door leading to the investigator's table opens slightly and a figure steps through. Lisa doesn't catch his face, but his presence commands immediate attention as the room quiets yet again. Whatever happens next, it's clear this is far from over. The makeshift terminal room buzzes quietly with an air of nervous expectation, punctuated only by the ticking of a wall clock and the scratch of pens on clipboards. Lisa sits stiffly in one of the crimson plastic chairs near the back, her daughter now awake but groggily clinging to her shoulder. Around her, clusters of Flight 237's passengers whisper in subdued tones, stealing glances toward the investigators working at the far end of the room. The suited man has stationed himself just outside one of the temporary barriers, speaking low and measured into an investigator's ear. Though the words are inaudible, his calm authority seems to steer the direction of the discussion. Angela, stationed behind a counter with her colleagues by the airline staff, shifts on her heels. She looks distracted, her clipboard held like a shield, and her gaze darting from one investigator to another. Her usual brisk efficiency has been replaced by a strained, fragile veneeran attempt to maintain dignity amidst the subtle judgment radiating from the passengers she once brushed off. Lisa strokes her daughter's soft hair absently, trying to still the tremor in her fingers. Her mind drifts to the events on the flight, the sticky armrest, Angela's bitten words, the crash of judgment that had left her humiliated and enraged. But now, after the emergency landing, things had shifted. Small acts of support from passengers, the commanding presence of the suited man, and the actions of the nurse had given her a hint of hope, but the faintest knot of doubt remains, coiling tightly in her chest. From across the room, Angela catches sight of Lisa. A flicker of something, shame, guilt, indecision crosses her face. Her lips part briefly as though she intends to approach, but hesitation roots her to the ground. Lisa feels the weight of the moment but does not acknowledge Angela's gaze. Instead, she focuses on her daughter's warm face, muttering softly to calm both of their nerves. The small act of avoidance speaks volumes, hanging heavily in the air between them. Eventually, one of the investigators, a younger man with neatly combed brown hair and a clipped professional manner, steps forward. He clears his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Passengers of Flight 237, he begins, his voice steady though edged with authority. "We understand tonight has been an exceptionally trying experience for you. In light of the incidents aboard your flight, we will be conducting secondary interviews to clarify specific details. Please be assured, we are committed to fully understanding what transpired and holding all parties accountable." The room stiffens as he speaks. While the passengers remain quiet, the implication behind the phrase, "holding all parties accountable," sends a ripple of nervous anticipation through the group. Angela, visibly paling, averts her gaze and begins furiously jotting notes on her clipboard, though the motions lack the precision she usually carries. The suited man, now leaning slightly into the barrier near the investigators, gives an almost imperceptible nod. It's unclear whether it's directed at the agent or at the room full of watchful passengers, but it has a grounding effect nonetheless. One by one, names are called again. Lisa hears other passengers give their accounts. Snippets of conversations emerge from behind the partitioned rooms. Phrases like condescending tone, ignored requests, and unnecessary escalation drift faintly through the air, confirming that Angela's behavior did not go unnoticed. Lisa isn't sure whether to feel vindicated or exhausted as she waits, the minutes dragging by at a glacial pace. Finally, Angela's name is called. The room falls noticeably quieter, all eyes subtly or not so subtly turning in her direction. Lisa watches as the flight attendant exhales sharply, shoulders stiff as she makes her way across the room. The moment feels heavy, though no one speaks. Instead, the silent judgment is deafening. Angela keeps her head high, but her steps are careful, almost tentative. Once she disappears behind the partitioned doors, the passengers exchange whispered murmurs, their curiosity and anticipation palpable. Lisa glances toward the suited man, who remains near the periphery of the room. His posture is as composed as ever, though his eyes flick briefly toward the partition Angela disappeared into, a flash of unreadable calculation crossing his face. Whatever conclusions he's drawn remain locked behind his polished exterior, but Lisa senses that his role in tonight's events isn't finished. 15 minutes pass, then 20. Angela's debriefing stretches longer than anyone else's, adding fuel to the simmering tension in the room. Lisa rocks her daughter gently, fighting the creeping fatigue that makes her head feel heavy. Just as she begins to wonder if Angela will ever emerge, the partition door creaks open. Angela steps out, her face a battle of conflicting emotions. Her usual professional mask cracks under the pressure of reality creeping in. She moves briskly back to her station, avoiding eye contact with anyone, though the faint redness around her eyes betrays her turmoil. Whether it is relief, regret, or indignation behind her expression, Lisa cannot tell. Perhaps it is all three. The airline staff cluster around Angela, whispering hurriedly. From the tension in their body language, a mix of cautious sympathy and restrained judgment, it is clear that consequences are imminent. Moments later, the suited man shifts his posture, stepping toward the lead investigator. The two confer quietly, their silhouettes stark against the fluorescent-lit backdrop. Whatever they're discussing signals a shift in the room's atmosphere. Passengers lean forward ever so slightly, hanging on to the suspense of what might follow. The lead investigator addresses the room again, his voice cutting through the growing hum of speculation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Further details regarding tonight's incidents will be shared with you individually as investigations proceed. We are committed to ensuring that all actions taken tonight, good or bad, are thoroughly reviewed. Please be assured, accountability will be pursued where it is warranted. Though his words are controlled, they feel like a promise, one reinforcing a sense that justice is inching closer to the surface. The passengers exchange uncertain glances, though many seem comforted by the investigator's assurance. Lisa watches the suited man closely as he nods to the lead investigator and begins walking toward the exit. For a flickering moment, he passes close enough to meet Lisa's gaze directly. His expression softens ever so slightly. "Stay safe," he says, his voice low but steady, before disappearing into the cool night outside the terminal. His presence, though brief, leaves an impression, a quiet acknowledgement that Lisa is not invisible, nor silenced. The words feel like a lifeline, even if just for now. As Angela lingers by the airline staff, visibly uncertain about her next steps, the clock overhead ticks on. Justice is promised, but its form is still unknown. Lisa pulls her daughter closer, resolved to await what comes next, even as the weight of exhaustion presses against her like a tide that refuses to recede. The story isn't over, it merely waits for its next chapter to unfold. Angela's once brisk and dismissive demeanor now contrasted starkly with the visible collapse of her composure. As she shuffled papers and awaited the final word from the lead investigators, each second felt heavier than the last. The room had thinned out. Those passengers not deemed relevant to critical parts of the incident had been quietly allowed to leave, escorted to waiting rooms or transport connections. But Lisa, clutching her now peacefully sleeping daughter, remained seated amidst a growing tension that only deepened with every passing whisper and glance. The suited man was gone. His presence, as commanding as it had been, had left a void. Though his intervention had provided the passengers a vital sense of support during the chaos, his understated farewell seemed to suggest he had more to attend to elsewhere. Yet Lisa felt the shift in the room. It oscillated between the lingering discomfort of Angela's behavior and the professionals circling with silent notes, recordings, and verifications of witness testimonies. In many ways, it had left Angela exposed. And Lisa wondered, was her silence complicit in allowing all this to happen on that long flight? Could she have done something sooner? The guilt, albeit irrational, trickled into her mind as she circled those moments like an unsolvable equation. But then, how could she have when, for so long, no one had caught onus if her humiliation had no echo, and her voice would shatter unnoticed? Nearby, another agent walked toward the airline staff. The sleek authority of his movements caught everyone's attention without asking for it. He looked toward Angela and beckoned her without saying a word. Her shift in expression was sharp, almost painful to watch. Others in the crowd, remaining passengers still recounting stories or waiting for closure, shared distracted glances. Lisa leaned back slightly in her chair as Angela disappeared into yet another conference room. By now, many had speculated Angela's fate, passengers muttering everything from, "She'll get fired for sure," to, "Airlines will just cover this up, don't fool yourself." Each theory came with its dose of cynicism. But in Lisa's heart, though doubt clung to her, she hoped tonight wouldn't turn into another example of skirting accountability. As the minutes passed, she realized she wasn't the only one staring absently toward the now closed door Angela had walked through. Several passengers, their weary faces like mirrors to her strained exhaustion, were focused on that very same space. The air was thick, not just with fatigue, but with the collective craving for closure and consequence. Finally, the investigators re-entered the central space of the temporary holding room. Their posture suggested finality, and for one sharp moment, all murmurs came to an abrupt halt. It was as if the very room itself held its breath. "We'll be concluding these procedures shortly," one investigator began, his voice professional but carrying a weight that turned even casual statements into declarations. As with all major flight incidents, a comprehensive analysis will follow in conjunction with external oversight, but multiple internal errors have been acknowledged by staff. His gaze met Lisa's briefly, almost imperceptibly, as if conveying something unspoken. Angela emerged next. Her once rigid figure now looked half its resilience. Her face appeared carefully controlled, but she couldn't hide faint reddening around her eyes. She moved toward the airline crew with her head low, though the passengers' gazes burned into her back. Lisa felt an odd churn of both pity and vindication, the raw components of unfinished justice. "Additional training and immediate internal reviews have already been mandated," the investigator continued, as curious murmurs rippled through the crowd around him. He didn't directly name Angela, though the implication nestled uneasily in the air. "We also recognize the outstanding professionalism and care demonstrated by certain passengers who mitigated further escalation under difficult circumstances." That must mean the suited man, Lisa thought absently. Him and the nurse, of course. But she realized her hands still trembled faintly, gripping her daughter's small fingers a little too tight. It was a fruitless act of grounding herself after a night that had spiraled beyond control. Tears threatened to push themselves forward yet again, but she blinked hard, forcing resolve to steady her gaze on the bright overhead fluorescence instead. The murmurs reached a peak as Angela dropped her clipboard to walk hesitantly toward the group of passengers. For the first time that day, she made no effort to carry authority. She wasn't the ice queen of Flight 237 anymore, more like a melting ice shard, dripping as though even standing straight required a burdened effort. Pausing just a few feet from Lisa, Angela hesitantly directed her gaze toward the floor, not at the mother whose seat she'd stood by earlier with sneering dismissiveness, not at the baby whose cries had sparked disdain in Angela's tired eyes. Yet her every inch of presence seemed carved from the sharp weight of unspoken intentions. The apology that came wasn't verbal nor explicit. Angela cleared her throat slightly, whispered something inaudible in low tones to no passenger in particular, grabbed the edges of her sleeves briefly in a fidgeting movement, then exhaled awkwardly. She pivoted moments later before walking briskly back toward the staff-only doors marked for airline personnel. To Lisa, it was clear Angela had chosen to remove herself rather than face uncertainty. "We'll be here to field questions privately as needed," the investigator politely closed, while his staff began removing lines of chairs and marking final attendance reports. The fatigue around them visually snapped into focus across hunched necks, teary eyes, and the sheer ache embedded within lowered shoulders. But for Lisa specifically, the real cliffhanger tied itself differently. Out of all the passengers that now began trickling into waiting transport arrangements, none, not one including her, seemed satisfied by the incomplete cycle of calm crisis review. Did anyone bear actual liability here tonight, apart from the anonymous elderly whose emergency worsened tension? Or was tonight's verdict less about clear winners and far closer toward balanced failures heavily weighed down? The night hung like a weighted curtain over the terminal, its fluorescent lights glaring down on rows of exhausted passengers and airline crew. The air was thick with muted conversations, the quiet scratching of pens on paper, and the subtle shifts of bodies yearning for resolution. Lisa, seated near a partitioned wall, cradled her restless daughter, her mind looping through the events that brought them here. Angela's earlier departure into the investigator's office just minutes prior loomed over the room. Though her face had shown the slightest cracks of shame and regret, no clear answers had emerged. It left both Lisa and the other passengers grappling with the same question. Would the rush of adrenaline and tense questioning bring closure, or would it dissolve into supervised inaction? Lisa's daughter stirred, letting out a sleepy murmur, and she instinctively rocked her back into calm. But her eyes flickered toward the airline crew, their gathered figures a mix of rigid professionalism and restrained nerves. Angela's absence among them felt loud, even in her silence. Barely processed thoughts clashed in Lisa's mind. She replayed the way Angela's clipped tone, dismissive demeanor, and biased snipes had escalated throughout the flight. Logic told Lisa that any decision this incident hinged upon could likely go ignored, swallowed in procedure, or brushed into airline protocols aimed at containment over justice. Yet her gut tensed with the faintest flicker of hope. Angela's unraveling composure hinted at something more than routine damage control. Perhaps accountability wasn't out of reach. The door separating the investigator's room opened slightly, and Angela emerged at last. Her previous attempts at composure seemed stripped away entirely. She moved tentatively, her usually firm steps measured and subdued. Her trembling hands clutched a clipboard against her chest as though desperate for an anchor in the churning waves of judgment. Lisa watched, torn between vindication and empathy. No words passed between the two women, though their unspoken conflict seemed to surge in the dimly lit space. Angela paused near the staff table, exchanging hushed words with a senior airline official seated beside her. The official's face blended exhaustion with tempered sternness, an expression that hinted at decisions lingering just out of view. Lisa sensed the faintest electric charge of momentum shifting beneath Angela's unreadable gaze. Whether it was regret or sheer exhaustion fueling her was unclear, and yet, Angela's every action now carried the weight of inevitability. At the far end of the room, amidst rows of transport arrangements being coordinated for the gradually thinning crowd, the lead FAA investigator stepped forward. He positioned himself just outside the cluster of chairs where many passengers sat, his calm but unwavering tone cutting clean through idle murmurs. "Thank you again for your patience during this process," he began, his voice deliberate. Behind him stood a younger investigator with a black tablet cradled to his chest. "After thorough review and interviews, we've compiled sufficient details regarding the onboard issues that necessitated tonight's emergency landing. Further inquiries into systemic oversights and possible personnel failures are now initiated under an immediate supervision order." Passengers leaned subtly forward. The lead investigator's precision was captivating. Whether acknowledging their collective hurt or alluding to larger operational flaws, his words cascaded with linear steadiness, each syllable heavy with the underlying promise of action. In particular, he continued, a notable number of testimonies highlighted both procedural mismanagement and interpersonal misconduct directly contributing to tensions during the flight. His eyes swept briefly over the cluster of seated passengers, narrowing momentarily as they landed near Lisa's direction. Lisa froze. Though there was reassurance embedded in his framing, she couldn't help but feel her pulse quicken alongside bubbling anticipation. Angela shifted noticeably on her feet, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her clipboard harder. Her colleagues flanking nearby but further from scrutiny, tried avoiding unnecessary movement under unexpected glances from passengers. "This includes breaches in basic passenger safety communications," the investigator finished, measured and glaring sharply toward airline personnel, "and a failure to appropriately de-escalate unforeseen conflicts aboard." Lisa swore a shadow crossed Angela's expression, one she barely disguised, as the words landed. As Lisa rocked her daughter again, another investigator leaned toward the briefing group stationed with Angela. Amid their subtle exchanges, whispers crackled faintly. An uncomfortable dance arose, a careful balancing act. Containment, yet also restitution. The undercurrent of tension threading through the staff group became distinctly more visible, their faces contorting briefly between polite professionalism and dread-tinged uncertainty. Passengers watched this moment like silent jurors sitting in judgment from their rows. Comments murmured quietly near Lisa trickled into earshot, though most exchanges avoided loud projection. Finally, the investigator assigned nearby stepped closer back toward Angela. She startled slightly, dropping notes briefly against the table surface beside her. Lisa leaned inward subconsciously as responses built momentum through hushed dialogue. Had Angela made her case more auxiliary amidst excuse-heavy defense tones? Or acknowledged the corner pressure she moved toward slowly? Passengers sensed Angela's body stiffen near its folding edge. She held some half-contained reaction that failed, drifting visible frustration. Her ongoing detachment, harder masking this meeting's impact, visibly longer, multiple audiences absorbing every nuance across weighted compositional delay moments later. Angela's exit had left the passengers in a pensive state, scattered in small groups or lingering around the terminal with uncertain expressions. The investigators, meticulous in their approach, remained in the background, canvassing information and ensuring that every detail of the night's drama was recorded. Lisa tried to shake off the persistent exhaustion that clung to her like a heavy coat. She had to stay focused, for the sake of her daughter and herself, though her mind drifted often, replaying Angela's shaky steps and the quiet judgment etched across the room. As Lisa moved toward an empty chair closer to the terminal windows, her daughter stirred in her arms, whining softly in her sleep. Lisa adjusted her grip, offering soothing words that felt more like whispers to keep her own nerves in check. The hard plastic chair groaned slightly as she settled into it, shifting her carry-on bag beneath her feet. She surveyed the room, her gaze snapping briefly to the airline crew now aligned in a semicircle further back, their muted murmurs oddly conspiratorial. Angela wasn't among them. Maybe she had already retreated out of public view. The remaining passengers were abuzz with whispered frustrations, their voices just audible over the faint hum of the overhead lights. "I saw how she talked to that mother," a younger woman said to her seatmate, her arms crossed tightly. "It wasn't just rude, it was personal. You could feel it." Her companion nodded gravely, their faces drawn into reflective frowns. The sentiment echoed around Lisa like a steady drumbeat. Angela hadn't just been unkind. She had breached the sacred trust passengers place in an airline's professionalism. One of the investigators stepped away from the airline staff, holding a slim tablet in their hands. Their presence drew quiet attention from the room, even as they avoided direct address for the time being. Lisa couldn't discern much from their expression. It was the kind of neutral professionalism that made them effective, and yet, the way they moved held a gravity that signaled conclusions were incoming. For better or worse, the answers everyone waited for loomed closer. Near the terminal's entrance, a suited figure emerged, catching the collective attention of everyone present. It took Lisa a moment to realize it was the same suited man who had taken charge so seamlessly on board. His tailored jacket, while now slightly wrinkled, still gave him an air of command that even the investigators seemed to acknowledge as he approached. He exchanged a firm handshake with one of the agents before speaking in low tones, his hands gesturing sparingly but purposefully. Several passengers craned their necks discreetly, eager for any sign of what was being discussed. Lisa watched the interaction intently, her own thoughts a haze of curiosity and unanswered questions. Who was he? Why had he taken it upon himself to intervene so decisively? And why did he appear so comfortable in roles of authority? There was more to him than met the eye, and the intrigue of his presence continued to ripple through the crowd. As the suited man concluded his quiet exchange with the agent, he pivoted slightly, catching Lisa's eye from across the room. Though his expression remained calm, something in his gaze seemed to acknowledge her unspoken questions. He gave the faintest of nods, a gesture that felt oddly reassuring, as though to say, "This isn't over." It was fleeting, but it stayed with Lisa long after he walked away, his figure disappearing deeper into the restricted areas of the terminal. Minutes turned to what felt like hours as the remaining passengers were processed. Lisa's stomach growled softly, the sharp pangs of hunger cutting through her exhaustion. A table had been set up nearby with small snacks and bottles of water, offered as an apologetic gesture by the airline, though few felt particularly comforted by it. She grabbed a bottle absent-mindedly, sipping as her daughter awoke groggily and began to squirm. At last, the lead investigator called the room's attention with a crisp clap of hands. "Your statements and observations have been critical to this process," he began, standing at the center of the remaining passengers. "As of now, we have enough information to move forward with a preliminary resolution. While further review is required, immediate measures will be taken to address the lapses in protocol and treatment noted during Flight 237. A hush fell over the group. Everyone knew this meant Angela, though her absence from the room kept the announcement one step removed. Like a judgment delivered without an audience for its recipient, the investigator's voice remained steady. Effective immediately, implicated personnel will be relieved of duty pending further retraining and evaluation. Additionally, a broader assessment of boarding procedures, safety checks, and staff conduct will begin across the airline to minimize the risk of similar incidents in the future. Though the words were measured, a sense of finality hung over them. It wasn't the loud, triumphant justice some passengers had perhaps hoped for, but it was something, a tangible acknowledgement, that what had happened mattered, that it wouldn't simply be swept under the carpet. Lisa felt a strange mixture of emotions swelling within her, relief that Angela's behavior hadn't been ignored, frustration at how procedural the resolution still felt, and an odd pang of empathy for a woman whose actions had undeniably contributed to the chaos of the night. She wondered whether Angela, wherever she was now, felt the weight of what had unfolded, or if she had already begun rationalizing it away. As the crowd began to thin further, passengers departing on coordinated shuttles to nearby hotels, the suited man reappeared at the terminal's edge. He didn't linger, didn't speak to the crowd, but his presence alone acted as a subtle signal of closure. Lisa watched him go, her thoughts a swirl of unfinished reckonings. The night had brought no easy cures, no swift resolutions, but whispers of justice trickled through the cracks, carried in nods, in spoken truths, and in the quiet acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Tomorrow would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but for now, Lisa felt a small, fragile sense of peace settle over her. She cradled her daughter close, whispering softly as the terminal lights began to dim. Though the night's journey was over, its lessons would linger for Angela, for the passengers, and most of all, for Lisa herself, whose voice had been seen, heard, and most importantly, believed. Angela remained firmly planted on the bench in the far corner of the terminal, staring unfocused at a smudge on the linoleum floor. Her clipboard now rested face down next to her, a silent symbol of the authority she'd carried so confidently earlier in the day, but which seemed to have completely evaporated since the flight's descent. The hum of muted voices filled the terminal as passengers filed out toward shuttles, exhaustion evident in every step they took. Yet Angela stayed, seated as though she were tethered to the spot, isolated even amongst the remaining staff and passengers still milling about. Angela's solitude is fragmented by the soft shuffle of footsteps approaching her corner of the terminal. She doesn't look up at first, unwilling to meet any gaze that might carry judgment or curiosity. But when the weight of someone's presence feels intentional and lingering, she glances hesitantly upward. It's the lead investigator, clipboard in hand, his expression firm but not unkind. He doesn't sit, but the way he stands suggests he's expecting more than just silence. "Miss Thompson?" he prompts, his tone neutral but edged with purpose. Angela stiffens slightly, instinctively clutching the clipboard at her side, as though it might shield her from the conversation to come. She nods curtly, acknowledging him, but does not respond immediately. Her composure, once a finely tuned mask during her duties, is now fragile, and cracks are beginning to show. "You've been cooperative tonight," the investigator continues, pausing as if to allow her room to take creditor to prepare her rebuttal. But cooperation isn't the same as accountability. His pen hovers over his clipboard, the faint tap of its end against the surface breaking the heavy silence. Angela finally exhales, a shaky breath that betrays the inner turmoil she has been holding back. She starts, but her voice falters. She clears her throat and tries again. "I didn't handle myself well on that flight." The admission seems rushed, as though forcing the words out might lessen their weight. The investigator's gaze does not soften. "That much is evident," he replies, his words clipped but not cruel. He leans slightly forward, just enough to command Angela's full attention. "But I need specifics, Miss Thompson. What were you thinking when you dismissed the passenger's request for assistance, or when you addressed a crying infant as if their presence alone was the issue?" Angela flinches at the directness of his questions. She feels once again the weight of the cabin's eyes on her, the way passengers had exchanged glances, whispered, judged. She'd felt it even as she tried to deny it in the moment. She shifts uncomfortably, her fingers tightening around the clipboard until her knuckles whiten. "I didn't think," she admits, the words tumbling out reluctantly. "I was tired, frustrated, the flight was packed, I was already behind on the beverage service, and then that mother." She cuts herself off, realizing she's inching dangerously close to excusing herself. The investigator catches it, his pen pausing mid-note as he raises an eyebrow. "That mother," he repeats, his tone carefully measured. "That mother was a paying passenger, just like everyone else on that flight. And yet, by all accounts, including yours, you singled her out. Why?" Angela struggles to find a response, her lips parting and closing as if the answer might materialize if she waited long enough. Finally, she shakes her head, her frustration with herself evident. "I don't know," she says quietly. "Maybe it was her tone, her demeanor. I told myself she was being demanding, but..." She falters again, the weight of her own words sinking in. "But I don't think she was. Not really." The investigator studies her closely, the silence between them charged with tension. "And do you think your frustration justified or not warranted your behavior toward her?" Angela shakes her head again, this time more emphatically. "No," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "It didn't." The investigator nods, jots something down, and then closes his clipboard with a decisive snap. Acknowledging your mistakes is important, he says, his tone softening slightly. But it's not enough, Miss Thompson. Not for the passengers you let down, not for the airline, and not for yourself. The steps forward won't be easy, but they're necessary. Do you understand? Angela nods, unable to speak. Her throat feels tight and her chest aches with a mixture of regret and relief. When the investigator steps away, leaving her to her thoughts, she feels both lighter and more burdened than before. Meanwhile, across the terminal, Lisa watches the interaction from a distance. She can't hear the words exchanged, but she doesn't need to. The body language, the way Angela shrinks under the investigator's scrutiny, is enough to tell the story. A part of Lisa feels validated, knowing that Angela's actions won't go unnoticed or unchallenged. But another part of her feels, not sympathy exactly, but something adjacent to it. She recognizes the weight of guilt when she sees it, and it's clear that Angela is carrying plenty. Lisa shifts her daughter in her arms, cradling her closer as the baby stirs. The exhaustion in her own body is impossible to ignore, but she feels a flicker of peace knowing that, at least for tonight, she hasn't been entirely invisible. Her voice and her daughter's cries may not have been welcomed, but they had been heard. As the last passengers are escorted toward waiting shuttles, Lisa steps into the cool night air. The terminal's fluorescent lights cast long shadows on the pavement, and the distant hum of engines fills the otherwise quiet space. She glances over her shoulder one last time, catching sight of Angela through the glass. The flight attendant sits alone, her head bowed, her once pristine uniform now wrinkled and telling of the night's toll. Their eyes don't meet, but Lisa feels an unspoken finality pass between them. The suited man from earlier emerges from the shadows near the shuttle. He approaches Lisa briefly, his calm demeanor unchanged. "You did well," he says simply, his words carrying a weight of acknowledgement. Before she can respond, he steps into the shuttle, leaving her with a lingering sense of both closure and curiosity. As Lisa boards her own shuttle, her mind drifts, not to the chaos of the flight or Angela's unraveling, but to the quiet strength it had taken for her to endure it all. She presses a kiss to her daughter's forehead, the faint hum of the engine beneath her feet lulling them both into a fragile calm. Tomorrow would bring more questions, perhaps even more challenges. But for now, she allows herself the smallest sliver of hope that justice, slow and imperfect, is still within reach. Angela's heart pounded as each minute dragged on. She remained seated in the now mostly empty terminal, her mind swimming with fragmented thoughts that held her captive between regret and defensiveness. The remains of the night's events churned in her mind like a storm she couldn't escape. The cold tile beneath her feet grounded her physically, but her mental state was anything but stable. The lead investigator and his assistant were still conferring with the airline supervisors a few feet away. Their low voices carried just enough for Angela to occasionally catch snippets, though the exact nature of their final conclusions remained beyond her grasp. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, wrapping her arms around her torso as if to shield herself from the weight of the lingering judgment she could still feel from the passengers who had shared the harrowing flight. Across the other side of the terminal, a few passengers whispered amongst themselves while waiting for their remaining transport arrangements. Though a majority had been escorted out, these last stragglers shared a muted energy, their faces tired but reflective. Lisa was among them. Cradling her daughter as a staff member brought her a bottle of water. Lisa herself was drained, her body aching not just from the night's physical demands, but from holding the emotional weight of everything they had endured. She had thought the initial tension from Angela's behavior had been the worst of it, but the flight's emergency landing, the elderly man's collapse, and the chaos after had stretched every ounce of her patience and resolve. The door at the side of the terminal clicked open, drawing the focus of everyone still present. Angela's head lifted instinctively, though she immediately regretted it. The suited Manthe passenger from row 17, who had commanded respect and even taken leadership during key moments on the flight, walked out, his calm yet authoritative demeanor still intact despite the weight of the night. Accompanying him was a member of the investigative team. Angela's chest tightened. Though she hadn't directly interacted with him since the flight, she had felt the weight of his gaze, the sharpness of his observations. It was clear that he had been instrumental in ensuring that her actions, or lack thereof, would not go unnoticed. And now, seeing him stride purposefully across the terminal toward the passengers, Angela could feel her composure fraying further. The investigator exchanged a quiet word with the suited man before turning his attention back to the airline supervisors. The suited man's gaze, however, moved directly to Lisa. As their eyes met, Lisa felt an unexpected jolt of acknowledgement. He approached her carefully, his expression measured but sincere. "Mrs. Harding," he began, his voice calm yet carrying the same quiet authority it had aboard the plane. "I wanted to take a moment to personally hear if you feel tonight's proceedings brought any closure for you." His statement wasn't patronizing, it was resolute, as if he genuinely sought her perspective. Lisa shifted her daughter's weight in her arms, her exhaustion briefly giving way to the clarity his question required. "I think some things were addressed," she replied with cautious honesty. Her voice was soft, but her words carried the depth of her emotions. "But closure? I'm not sure yet." "Angela?" She hesitated, glancing toward the flight attendant who remained seated far across the room. She acknowledged her mistakes, I think, but it didn't feel enough. "Not yet." The suited man nodded, his expression thoughtful. He glanced toward Angela as well, his gaze lingering on her slumped posture. "Accountability takes time," he said after a moment. "But it's important that voices like yours aren't disregarded. What happened tonight won't dissolve into bureaucracy. That, I can promise you." Lisa felt a surprising swell of gratitude for his words. She managed a small, tired smile and nodded her thanks. As he stepped away, Lisa caught herself wondering once again about his background, his connection to the investigation, and his clear dedication to ensuring fairness. But before she could dwell on it further, her crying infant pulled her attention, and she focused on comforting her child once again. Angela, watching this interaction from her corner, felt the stinging sting of isolation creep deeper under her skin. For the first time in years of working as a flight attendant, she felt completely untethered adrift without her usual confidence to guide her. Would tonight be the defining moment of her career's unraveling? Or could she somehow rebuild from the wreckage she had so clearly contributed to? Her thoughts were interrupted by the lead investigator stepping toward her. His expression was neutral but resolute, and Angela steeled herself for whatever he might say next. "Miss Thompson," he began, his clipped tone leaving little room for misunderstanding. "Your in-flight conduct has been reviewed in detail this evening. While we've noted contributing factors such as extreme circumstances and passenger volume, your responses to key moments, including the treatment of Mrs. Harding, fall well below professional expectations." Angela swallowed hard, her mouth dry as she nodded mechanically. She anticipated his next words but dreaded them all the same. "Effective immediately, you will be placed on administrative leave pending mandatory retraining," the investigator continued. "Additionally, your conduct report will be reviewed as part of the airline's broader procedural assessment. Any corrective action will depend on that review's findings." The authority in his tone made the finality of his decision unmistakable. Angela managed a quiet, "I understand," though her voice betrayed her turmoil. The investigator gave her a curt nod before turning back toward the airline supervisors, leaving Angela alone once more. Her clipboard lay forgotten at her side, her hands folding tightly in her lap. Across the terminal, Lisa caught sight of Angela's disheartened posture. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, compassion or pity, but she exhaled deeply, turning her attention back toward the exit signs that promised the end of a long, exhausting night. As she prepared to leave, the faint hum of conversations around her ebbed and flowed, underscoring the lingering echoes of a night no one involved would soon forget. In the recesses of her mind, however, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that the flight's story wasn't completely over. And as the suited man stepped back into the shadows, heading toward his own destination, a glimmer of curiosity about the days ahead remained suspended in the air. As the last group of passengers exited the terminal and climbed into awaiting shuttles, the atmosphere around Flight 237's holding area began to shift. Exhaustion was etched deeply into every face, but there was also a palpable sense of expectation, as though everyone was waiting for a final chord to bring closure to the night's chaotic symphony. Lisa lingered near the rear of the room, her daughter bundled against her chest, while Angela, seated in isolation near a corner, seemed locked in an internal battle that weighed heavier than any external confrontation. The investigators were debriefing among themselves at a separate table, their muted voices giving no indication of the resolution that felt so close yet remained unclear. Angela clutched her arms tightly around her middle, her clipboard discarded on the floor beside her chair. Her once meticulously neat uniform was now crumpled and stained, the physical representation of her unraveling composure. Every so often, her eyes would dart around the room, never landing on any particular face for too long. When they found their way to Lisa, she flinched, her lips parting as if to speak, but she stopped herself before any words emerged. Lisa watched this silently, torn between lingering resentment and reluctant empathy. The events of the night had left scars on everyone, Lisa included, but Angela's fall from grace had been more public, more visible. This wasn't about redemption. Lisa wasn't sure Angela deserved that just yet, but something about the flight attendant's broken expression felt human. This was no longer the icy, imperious enforcer who had dismissed her with a cutting remark. This was someone crumbling under the weight of her own actions, someone clearly coming to terms with the consequences. The silence in the terminal was broken by the sharp sound of a door opening. All eyes turned toward the entrance as the suited man from row 17 stepped back into the room. His commanding presence hadn't diminished in the slightest, and whatever clouds of distraction had lingered among the passengers seemed to dissipate as he entered. He approached the group of investigators with his usual purposeful stride, exchanging several quiet words with them while gesturing toward Angela and the remaining passengers. Their expressions were measured but gave little away. After a moment, one of the lead investigators, a stern-looking woman with piercing eyes, stepped forward. The room grew still as she positioned herself where everyone could see her. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience," she began, her authoritative tone commanding attention. "As of now, our immediate assessment of the incidents aboard Flight 237 is complete. What transpired tonight reflects both individual failures and systemic issues that cannot and will not be ignored." Angela's face paled further. Lisa tightened her hold on her daughter, steadying herself for whatever words came next. "First and foremost," the investigator continued, "to the passengers of Flight 237, your voices have been heard. Your experiences and testimonies will contribute to the airline's broader commitments to accountability and improvement. That being said, we must also acknowledge that trust has been broken tonight, and restoring it will require time and action." The murmurs of passengers quieted even further, anticipation hanging thick in the air. The investigator glanced briefly at Angela before continuing. "As for the actions of specific individuals, including certain members of the cabin crew, appropriate disciplinary measures have been initiated. Miss Angela Thompson has been placed on indefinite administrative leave, effective immediately. She will also be required to participate in remedial training focused on de-escalation protocols, bias awareness, and passenger care, as determined by the Airline Review Committee. Further decisions regarding her employment will depend on the results of this review." The weight of her name hanging in the air seemed to crush Angela further into her chair. She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the arms of her seat so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her shame was visible, and for the first time, she didn't try to mask it. The investigator turned next to the passengers. "We understand that this does not erase the frustration and discomfort many of you have endured. While we cannot undo what has happened, be assured that this process is only the beginning. Documentation will be shared with the appropriate oversight committees, and further accountability at all levels of operation will be pursued." Turning her gaze toward Lisa, just for a moment, the investigator added, "If there is any additional feedback or concerns you wish to raise, now would be the time to speak." Lisa hesitated. Every nerve in her body was screaming to remain silent, to let the process run its course without further involvement. She was drained, but then, the way Angela had dismissed her flashed in her mind. The icy remark, the way she'd felt invisible until the suited man had stepped in. She stood slowly, and the room turned to her in a ripple of attention. Her voice, though quiet, carried through the space. "I just want to know," she began, her grip tightening on her daughter, "what happens after tonight? To all of us? The passengers? The crew? Are we just meant to move on and forget this ever happened?" The investigator nodded, her expression softening slightly. "It's natural to feel that way, Mrs. Harding. We won't ask anyone to forget. What we can promise is transparency. There will be follow-ups. You and everyone here will receive detailed updates about the outcome of this investigation and the subsequent actions taken. But for tonight," she added with a faint, reassuring smile, "we hope you can find some peace knowing that the process has begun." Lisa absorbed her words, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she sat back down. Across the room, Angela shifted uncomfortably, though she did not speak. The suited man stepped forward then, addressing the passengers directly. "Closure isn't immediate," he said evenly, his deep voice cutting through the room. "But tonight progress was made. You have stood up, spoken out, and demanded accountability. And that matters. He turned to Angela, his gaze piercing but devoid of malice. People can change, but only if they're willing to face the weight of their actions. He didn't wait for a response, pivoting toward the exit as he adjusted the lapels of his suit. "Good night, everyone. Safe travels." With that, the tension in the room began to dissipate. Passengers gathered their belongings, murmuring quietly as they prepared to leave. Lisa held her daughter close, feeling a bittersweet mix of relief and exhaustion settle over her. Angela remained seated, staring ahead blankly, left to reckon with the echoes of her decisions. As Lisa exited the terminal into the cool night air, she took one last glance back at the building. The story of Flight 237 wasn't over yet. Not for the airline, not for Angela, and not for Lisa herself, but for now, the first steps toward justice had been taken. And that, she realized, was enough for tonight.